want to give you an overview of three different phases of life in our parish and our diocese. Okay? One of those is going to be referred to as preparing for the wilderness. A second is going to be the story of one parish's odyssey over the last, as Dan said, the last 3.5 years of our life in a theater every week. And the third phase is what's ahead. You'll see in some of the comments I have the chronology of the litigation, and more importantly, what's happening in our diocese to reconcile parishes that have been split apart. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to give you that story. And again, any of you who've been involved in litigation know one always begins with a disclaimer. There's a seal up there of the Diocese of Fort Worth. I speak as an individual, okay, not on behalf of the diocese. So just want to be very clear about that. Been a standing committee member, been a senior warden, but I'm just speaking as myself here. Now I'm going to open this with what could be a somewhat challenging test here. What's wrong with this picture? Now with the lights on, it could be a little bit challenging. But there are two things, for those of you that are astute observers, there are two things that are unusual and wrong about this picture. The first of those is, on the left-hand side, that is a female celebrating at an altar in Fort Worth. Okay? And the second is, if you look to the right, it's actually the presiding bishop. Now, in the picture of the presiding bishop, you'll notice there's a small child. The child is not running away. So I want to begin with pointing out that in most people's view of Fort Worth, girls don't celebrate communion, and the presiding bishop represents all the things that we detest. Not true. Now I can assure you, she was not there just because she happened to be in town. Okay? In fact, she was there on February 9th, 2009, and here is a picture of the presiding bishop beginning the worship service the morning of a reorganizing convention for the Fort Worth Diocese. And you see her on the right actually blessing a new building during that same trip. None of that happened by accident, because since November 16th of 2008, we had been preparing for what was inevitable. And what I mean by inevitable is that on November 15th, 2008, Jack Eicher and the then leadership of the Episcopal Diocese voted to leave the Episcopal Church. Now, you know and I know, and you just heard Kirk say you can't do that, but they did. Okay? And so for those of us who never intended to be part of that, we'd been preparing for that for some period of time. And on November 16th, 2008, we were dealing with what we had come to understand was the inevitable. So just to give you a frame of reference, prior to November of 2008, the Diocese of Fort Worth represented 55 parishes and missions. It had a little bit over 20,000 members and had been subjected to roughly 30 years of misinformation about the Episcopal Church, but still represented a very diverse views across many different parishes. After November 2008, here's what our diocese looked like. 8 intact parishes, 14 displaced congregations, and 5,000 members. So that's the scene where you see the presiding bishop arriving. As I mentioned, I want to talk to you over the next few minutes about 3 different periods of time. The first of those was getting ready for what you saw as that reorganizing convention. The second of those is really to talk about our experience as one of those displaced congregations, finally to give you some idea of what's happening now. What we really refer to in our parish as ground zero of the reconciliation process. So I'd like to take a few minutes and give you my point of view there. Yes, please. The question was, what happened in Fort Worth?
Why did you end up calling? I probably should know, but I don't.
Not at all, and perhaps you heard Kirk mention in the U.S. Episcopal Church, 4 dioceses over the last 4 years, at various times chose to say we're withdrawing from the national church. The largest of those was our diocese, which was the Fort Worth Diocese, where the then bishop and most of the clergy and many of the members simply said, we're leaving and we're taking the assets with us.
And were you part of that group who left?
No,
Okay.
I'm part of the group that stayed.
Okay.
A number of reasons. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes, okay? I can give you the short version, okay? But thank you for the question. It also makes me remember to say what I should have. Please feel free to interrupt as we go, okay? Please feel free to interrupt. And thanks for that clarification. The kind of upheaval happening in the larger national church felt very much like a tsunami locally in Fort Worth. The issues, no girls in this club, number one, okay? All male priests and no women allowed. Those repercussions in the larger national church were amplified in our Diocese of Fort Worth over a long period of time, and particularly began to accelerate after General Convention of 2006, okay? What did we do? Well, on your tables, you see some little flyers like this, okay? Steering Committee, North Texas Episcopalians. I want to talk about that for just a moment because what we did was begin to organize ourselves recognizing that the inevitable was about to happen, okay? This was a joint clergy lay group specifically designed to have an umbrella representation. We said from the very outset, this entity is single purpose and limited life. We exist solely to help get to the reorganizing diocesan convention. Our purpose is to collaborate with the presiding bishop's office and staff so there's a single point of contact rather than many voices trying to explain what's happening. This is important. We were able to isolate the technical legal issues away from the larger task of rebuilding a diocesan structure from the parish up. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, we were able to repeatedly confirm a future direction so that people in the pews who were watching their diocese disintegrate around them at least had one set of voices consistently saying, we know where we're going. Please come go with us. Steering Committee, North Texas Episcopalian. So as a result of that reorganizing diocesan convention, Ted Gulick, then the Bishop of Kentucky, was named as the provisional Bishop of Fort Worth and spent roughly half his time in Fort Worth and the other half commuting back to Kentucky. We were early and frequent collaborators with our colleagues in San Joaquin. Why? They were about 6 months ahead of us on the trail. So Nancy Key, who was a layperson, within 3 or 4 weeks of our steering committee beginning to form, flew to Fort Worth, spent the weekend training us in terms of how they had prepared as individual parishes to deal with the split that had come 6 months before. And Mike Glass, is the attorney, the chancellor for the Diocese of San Joaquin. So we had early and frequent collaboration with our colleagues, and surprisingly to most people in Fort Worth, we had immediate and continued collaboration from the presiding bishop's office, herself and her team, because many people feared the national church will do nothing. As it turned out, that was not the case at all, but it was an enormous fear. So once the diocese was reorganized, meaning we've put back together a structure, we've got a provisional bishop, we've got standing committee, we've got trustees, we put the diocesan structure back together, then I'd like to talk for a few minutes about what our journey has looked like at the parish level, because Marjorie and I are parts of St. Albans at Theater Arlington. We've been a part of, since November 16th of 2008, that worshiping community Dan talked about a moment ago that rolls it out every Sunday morning and picks it up every Sunday about noon. I'd like to talk about that. And you met Mother Melanie Barnett Wright, who is our priest in charge, and Melanie is going to talk a great deal more about activities in the parish itself, okay? So I'm just going to give you somewhat of an overview about our life as a parish, sort of week in and week out. Now, I certainly recognized when Kirk spoke that I have to remember I'm on the East Coast. So many people may not recognize Arlington, Texas. I thought I'd give you a frame of reference up here, okay? For those of you that don't know, this is Cowboys Stadium or Arlington Stadium, okay? Those of us that live in Arlington lovingly refer to it as Jerry World, okay? It was one of our options for another place to meet, and they are in the neighborhood, okay? But that's where Arlington, Texas is. It's between Dallas and Fort Worth, okay? And it's most frequently seen when it's time for NFL season. We did not start meeting there, okay? You remember I said that prior to November of 2008, there were 55 parishes and missions. And now I'm going to talk to you about the story of one of those displaced congregations. What does life there really look like? Well, the fact was, nobody else was going to figure out what was next. We had to do it ourselves, okay? We had to do it ourselves. So one of the things that we discovered was space in our downtown Theater Arlington, standalone community theater, seats about 200 people. And one of our other congregants, she and her husband were quite active in the local theater community and managed to work out and negotiate our use of that space. And in fact, even prior to beginning using it for worship space, during that period between March and November, we held public meetings the last Sunday of every month and said, come, we'll talk to you about what's the status of the litigation and what's the plan to get from here to there. So we began using the foyer, and then beginning on November 16th, every Sunday, we began having a worship service there. Now here's what it looks like before, okay? This just happens to be a set at Theater Arlington. Believe me, that's one of the less crowded sets. Melanie will have some specific examples to show you. But this is what it looks like at 8:30, and that's what it looks like at 9:30. Now again, you may be too far back, but that's a live celebrating bishop in the middle, okay? That's a live choir. By the way, none of them rented, all of them members, okay? Live musicians and real people, okay? So that's what we look like every Sunday morning. And about 60 minutes after that, that's what we look like, because there's a matinee. Okay? So it goes up and it goes down every Sunday. From the very beginning, our parish focused on outreach. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, that's Bonnie Anderson, President of the House of Deputies. We've had many dignitaries come to the theater. Last year, the Executive Council met in February, I want to say. They actually came for a reception at the theater and dinner at the Art Museum next door. So they've all been through to see where we live. But from the very outset, our vestry focused on outreach. We said, we'll take 10 cents of every dollar and convert that to an outreach beginning now. And we specifically then adopted specific collaborations in the community, both with the Arlington Life Shelter, which is within 3 blocks of where we are, and with an East Arlington area school, where our members tutor kids in reading. It gave us as a vestry the opportunity to completely rethink how would we serve this community if we were starting over? Because we are. It meant that with a 25,000 student university within 2 blocks of us, maybe we ought to reconsider our priority for campus ministry. And then we began to attract members from all of the local metro parishes, not just those of us who had been at the Brick Church on South Davis, where many of us came from. So our footprint began to expand. We've had a history of sustained growth. We began with roughly 60 people, and by the way, I realized I didn't think about this until this morning. We had no funding from anyone, no diocesan funding. So this was all grassroots. Here's a group of people who say, this is what we're going to do. We began with roughly 60, as Melanie will talk about. We're well over 100. From the very outset, we had at least half-time clergy. Now we've moved that to three-quarter time. We've seen our leadership expand across a much broader base of participation, not the same folks elected again and again. And consistently, our vestry has said, we're focused on service now, not when we get the building back, but now. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Our position has been open to all, because that's who we were before November of 2008, and it's who we are today. It's not just at St. Albans at Theodore Arlington, but throughout our diocese, there are signs of growth everywhere. This is a picture of Susan Slaughter, the first woman ordained in the Diocese of Fort Worth in history. In history. Now, I know for many of you, it's hard to believe, but I have other witnesses here. I have Melanie, and I have Demi Prentice, and I have Mother Amy Haney in this room who can testify that's the case. So in less than a year from the time of the split, we had reorganized and were healthy enough. We're ordaining a woman as a priest who the same day became the rector of a parish. Okay? Other displaced congregations, just like St. Albans, all around our diocese, that are doing the same thing we are, setting up on Sunday and tearing down in temporary space. And our diocese has been a full financial participant to the National Church since it was reorganized in February of 2009. Many people, I learned, in the National Church knew Fort Worth for a variety of reasons, but one was because it was cheap. It wouldn't pay its assessment. So we would not pay its assessment to the National Church. So we as a standing committee and a group of trustees at the founding or the reorganization of the diocese said we will be full financial participants from day one. This is the most recent sign of health in our diocese. On Palm Sunday morning, this was the newspaper. Local Episcopalians get first black female rector at the historic Trinity Church, which, by the way, was where that group of 12 or 15 people met in March of 2008 to create Steering Committee of North Texas Episcopalians. Carly Hughes will begin as the rector on June 2nd, Trinity Sunday. So signs of health throughout our diocese. Part 3. Getting ready for Sunday 1. Now, that is not a typo. That D is supposed to be a large D. And I'm going to give all the credit to Mother Amy Haney, who is hiding in the corner. I told her last night she's a prominent part of my presentation. She said, I'm not planning to stand up. I said, that's all right. I'm going to mention you anyway. It's not a problem. So Sunday 1 really refers to, okay, how do we put this thing back together? How do we put this back together? I call it good news and other news. Okay? This is a headline in the Fort Worth paper from January 22nd, 2011. Judge rules for National Episcopalians. Ball game, right? Not so quickly, please. Let me talk for a moment about stewardship of episcopal assets from a little bit different perspective. Okay? We filed suit in April of 2009. Remember, and by the way, I want you to kind of get a sense of these dates here because it gives new meaning to the word slow. We reorganized in February of 2009. 2 months later, we filed a lawsuit to reclaim the assets. Now, by the way, one of the little sidebars of all of this was in the process of filing, the judge in his wisdom decided, well, you can't have two corporations of the same name suing each other. So if you guys want to do this, you have to sue one another individually. So our individual names are the parties to the lawsuit. Talk about personalizing the conflict. So when you read the lawsuit in Fort Worth, you see names of individuals, okay? Names of individuals, as well as the corporate structure and the national structure. But just a little sidebar to let you know, okay? So we had to refile as individuals. There's been a single ruling, January of 2011, where the judge says, Jack, you have to give it back. No. And you see that it was not until November of 2011, almost a year later, that even with a ruling, we were able to force monthly reporting from all of the parishes and the diocese. It takes a while. And current state, we're in the Texas Supreme Court awaiting a trial date, and a trial date on a very narrow aspect of the lawsuit. The point of this is these things don't move fast, but life on the ground continues to go on. Fortunately, in our diocese, one of the things that's meant is that beginning in November of last year, a diocesan in-reach coordinator, you'll remember Mother Amy Haney, was hired to say, we're going to focus on getting ahead of this reconciliation process. And Amy and a team of people began something called Hope Building, and I certainly wouldn't attempt to talk about the intricacies of this diagram right here, other than to say it represents lots of work by lots of people going on now to prepare for the reunification of all of those people who left all of those buildings and all of those people who stayed behind. Now, we refer at St. Albans to ourselves as kind of ground zero of that reconciliation process. Here's the inventory that Amy and her team are focused on. Today, there are 8 intact parishes. Think brick parishes, okay? There are 14 of us out there wandering around in tents, and there are 33 where no one has held up his or her hand and said, we want to remain part of the Episcopal Church. Get those numbers? 8, 14, and 33. And so part of that process that Amy's leading right now is, how do you go about re-engaging with the laity? Because you can imagine what happened with the clergy. How do you get re-engaged with the laity that are still in those buildings? So let me give you an example for St. Albans. Arlington Metro represents about 400,000 plus in population, 7th largest city in Texas. Okay? In that metro area, we have brick church assets 5, plus 2 missions. But we now have a thriving downtown-based parish with no mortgage debt. So now what? What do you do? Well, we're not certain. But I can tell you from our standpoint, speaking as a St. Albans vestry person, somebody that wants to talk about buildings for a new tomorrow has got my attention, okay? Because we're really eager to learn how other dioceses have dealt with the issue of how do you repurpose all of these assets when the base changes radically. When the base changes radically. So, summarizing, I think here's what we learned. I'll say, here's what I learned. Getting ready for the split, the inevitable, we found that we were sustained by an abundance of resources we could not have predicted. Didn't know about, couldn't have predicted, and could not have been more plentiful or timely. And if my clicker will work. My observation about life at the theater is that we have consistently grown from unexpected sources. Consistently. People and opportunities have presented themselves, and we've continued to grow. What I do know about what's ahead is we're the ones responsible to lead. Nobody else is going to figure this out. So sometimes people say to me, why do this? These are the three most beautiful grandchildren in the world because they're mine. Okay? They live about 10 minutes away from us. And for Marjorie and me, we have 2 adult daughters and those 3 grandchildren, none of whom are part of our parish life. And so I say, it's important to create an Episcopal presence somehow that's attractive to people like this. Thank you.
So the piece that I'm going to be telling you and talking about, and when the Episcopal Church Building Fund made a contact with me that really sort of intrigued and inspired me, is that one of the things that I understand we're talking about here in this place is the fact that church buildings are being closed down. And some of these congregations, which are smaller and may not have the financial ability to sustain a property, are in this moment of, and now what? What do we do? Can we be a church without a building? And I came into the process about a year after what Walt described as the beginning. I was hired as the part-time priest in charge of this congregation, and I have had the fun and the joy of being part of a community and nurturing, growing together, expanding on people's gifts, and seeing it grow. And I think the main thing that people tell me when they come to visit our church is there is so much joy in that place on a Sunday morning. And so what I'm going to really be focused on is what we're doing, the ways that we are reaching out into the community. I like to use the words advertising and recruiting rather than evangelism. Episcopalians seem to be much more comfortable with those 2 words, though it's really the same thing. But we're going to just talk a little bit about things that we're doing, and then I invite questions. I don't know if any of you are in a situation or have friends that are, but I would be delighted to engage with you on that. The other thing to tell you before I start clicking through slides is that it's really interesting as we move into the 3rd phase, where reunion is on the horizon and we may be getting the buildings back. There is an interesting sort of energy that has moved among the people of, oh my goodness, we figured out how to do this without the building. Can we still do what we're doing with the building? And so, we're engaging in that conversation. And so that's really interesting. And knowing that we are now in a theater, and Walt mentioned that that was a connection made by one of our parishioners, I just want to point out as we start walking through all of this, that that is what I've seen, is that almost everything that has been provided is come through a gift, a resource, or a connection of someone in the church. Somebody knows somebody. Somebody has a gift. They're willing to share it. They're willing to put it forth. And that shared leadership and sharing of resources has given life to our community. This is a great picture off the web of a phoenix rising. And this is a wonderful image of something my children did one day. And they were just playing, and I don't know how well you can see this, but this is a repurposed site for a worship service. This is actually a Playmobil veterinarian clinic that has been converted into a church. And you'll notice to the side that the cages are now being used for cribs for the babies. 2 end tables have been pulled together for an altar. The bird bath is the baptismal font. And you can just see how cleverly they have redesigned that space to make it into a church. Now the reason I'm putting this out here to you is that this is what we're talking about. We're talking about tapping into that creative, imaginative spirit that God has placed in each of us. And rather than going, oh my goodness, it's a vet clinic, it's like, ooh, but how? How could we make it a church? And so it was fun for me just to see them doing it. The bishop lends his support and gifts. This is the bishop playing guitar at a women's retreat. And our bishops, both of the ones who have served us, have been there. They come, they're part of our life, they'll sit and listen. If I call, the bishop is there and he will work with me and lend me assistance and come and be with our people. This is a little map of our diocese. We're going to zoom in. Hang on, I'll back up just a second, maybe. Or I won't. Okay, fine. There was a small area that was circled, and that was our parish. And being at St. Albans in Arlington has really opened my eyes back up to what the word parish means. If you remember, the word parish is a geographic location. It is a boundary of area around which a priest was called to serve. And right now, that is our parish. It encompasses 7 worship sites, as Walt mentioned, 5 churches, 2 missions, that are all Episcopal buildings in this region, to which now we have 1 congregation that serves this entire region. We have people that come to church on Sunday morning that drive 45 minutes, and we're the closest Episcopal church to them. And so this is a pretty broad area. The other thing about this map is, this is our church. All those red things that you see squared, that's our people. And right after I had come to this congregation, a friend of mine from the Maryland church that I used to serve came for a visit. And it was on a Wednesday. And they said, "Oh, take me to your church. I'd love to see your church." And I'm like, "Okay, that's really interesting." I said, "I can take you to the building where we meet and show you the closet where we put everything. But my church is spread all over this region." And so we went, and I showed them the closet, and they thought it was funny how we stacked everything, and the altar's on its side, and all that. And then I remembered that the choir was meeting over at a music store. And so we drove across town to the music store, and I introduced them to part of my church. And that was the moment that, for me, it became really clear that our church is the people. And our people have an understanding of that. There's a sign we put out every Sunday morning out on the street curb so people know that it's not a theater anymore, but it is an Episcopal church. And this is an image that goes on the front of the bulletin, not the bulletin, the flyer that we have available for people to take and share with their friends. We've saved a seat for you. And we talk about that. We have a high emphasis on we are open to all. Our mission statement that we are the hands of the Lord, open to all, reaching out to the community and to the world. And this is something that when I meet somebody for the first time at our congregation, and a new person has come in, and I will just visit with them a minute and say, if you're just visiting, that's great, and we're glad you're here, and we'll pray for you on your journey. But if you're looking for a church, I just want you to know that if you want to get involved here, what we're looking for is not to put you in where we desperately need somebody to serve. But I want you to think about who you are and what your gifts are, and I want you to be able to go home and tell your friends, "You won't believe what I get to do at my church." And that is fundamental to our understanding of leadership in our church. We currently have an average Sunday attendance of 72 people. We have 31 different people in leadership in our church. And there it goes. This is one of the sets. That's our deacon. She's setting the altar. Every week, as Walt says, we reset our stage. And it's always fascinating because about every 6 weeks, the reredos changes. I think the most challenging to me personally was when we were in Lent during the Dr. Seussical world. That one was a challenge. Although the one that really I feared being a challenge was when we were going to be in Easter during the full Monty. And just like, yeah, come on down to the church. We're the one with the sign that says the full Monty on it. So anyway, okay, there we are. That's up on the stage, and blessing and distributing communion to the choir. This is on Palm Sunday. We walk from the theater down to the nearby neighborhood park with our palm procession. We stop there at the park at the end of the art museum right there behind us, and we do our station and then go back down to the theater to begin the rest of the service. This is not a great picture, but it does show you a little bit out in the lobby of the theater. There are small tables, and that's where we fellowship during coffee hour. That's where we have our coffee hour, and this is after Christmas Eve. We have Christmas cookies and a time to just visit there, and just wanting to point out to you that's what we do. That's also the space that we use for our primary adult ed class. So coming back out into the lobby, people get their coffee, we sit and we have adult formation. Across the street, there are 2 classroom spaces that we have been welcomed to use during that same 3-hour block on Sunday mornings, and that is where we have vestry meetings and our Sunday school classes. We only had the theater for Sunday mornings during that same block of time, so we held a concert with guest artists during the Sunday school hour. And part of the point of bringing this in is the notion of we've got to work with what we have. We couldn't schedule them for the evening because there's theater going on. And so we just said, all right, so instead of doing adult ed, we're going to let them sing. And we were able to enjoy that. This is across the street in the education building where we do various things. And right now we're wrapping presents for an angel tree project in which the church collected many, many gifts. And then we had a wrapping party. And the teenagers, of course, were over in the corner going, you know. But anyway, okay. Here's children wrapping. We're also using that same space to do poem crosses, Paisenki eggs. And the reason I wanted to put this slide in was once again talking about building on the resources in the congregation. We had 2 different individuals who had a fascination for Paisenki eggs. So rather than just doing only the poem crosses, we said, sure, why not? And we had a couple of years of really enjoying doing that work and making something beautiful. The other thing that's delightful is you'll notice that the ages are varied, and these are intergenerational events. And I think that is vital in a church our size, is to really engage in, we're all part of this. And yes, if you're a teenager and you're a full-grown adult, you might want to engage together and learn. And in fact, the teenager in this picture is one of the leading Paisenki artists, and he's helping the other people know how to do that. This is the upstairs classroom, and that currently, and you see in that picture, that is a gathering of our pastoral care team as it was at that time. And this is the same classroom being used for our children's Sunday school during the morning Sunday school hour. All right, so I'm going to pause with that for just a moment and say that is our space. That is the space that we use on Sunday morning. So we have the theater and those 2 classrooms for 3 hours. And we're trying to make use of that. Now what we began to find, though, is that as our community began to grow, we started going, yeah, but where are we going to have this other meeting? And where are we going to get together for a midweek? And what are we going to do about that? And so we began to look at, all right, we can actually rent the theater space, not the theater itself, it's way too expensive, but we can rent the classroom space sometimes, and we use it for Holy Week and stuff, but what else? And we began to look outward. And in the beginning, I did all my pastoral care meetings at like Starbucks and restaurants and things like that. We actually now have one tiny office and a little side office that we have in the educational building and we can use. But what we started realizing was that our life was going to be in ways that we engaged beyond our walls, beyond our immediate area. And so, attending diocesan-sponsored events. We're part of the Lenten programs, and the diocese can afford to bring in big-name speakers. And we've had some wonderful guests coming in. Presiding Bishop Shorey came, and also Bishop Barbara Harris, and a whole bunch of other people, but some wonderful speakers brought in that we can't afford, but by joining with the diocese, we can have the benefit of those opportunities. This is a diocesan women's retreat at, I think it was a Lutheran Conference Center. It was not Episcopal, and where women from all over the diocese came together, getting to know women from other churches. This is a diocesan youth caroling event, which Mother Amy Haney organized. So most of our little 14, dispersed congregations have only a small handful of youth. But when we get together, we've got actually a whole collection of kids that can do stuff. This is about participating in other youth-led events. This is a happening event, which happens with both Dallas and Fort Worth together. This is church camp that the Diocese of Dallas has opened their doors because our Camp and Conference Center is currently under other management. So we've been invited to participate in their youth camps so that you can have a broader church experience. And the other thing that's been really fun is to go to other churches. We don't have enough energy, space, or anything else to do a St. Nicholas event, for example. And so a nearby church, happens to be St. Anne's in Dallas Diocese, did. And several of our families went together to that event. We went and joined St. Luke's Church for a Mardi Gras party and used their space because that's on a Tuesday night and we don't have space. We joined the Methodist Church down the street for their trunk or treat event, and we added trunks to that. That is me right there in the pirate uniform. And that was fun. You know, it was just a way to laugh and play with our families, things that we can't do on site because the parking lot at our church is always filled with theater goers. And so by using the Methodist Church parking lot and joining them, that was a lot of fun. Here we are, we've gone to a church that does have a grounds. This is a congregation that has a property of 4.5 acres. They have a congregation of 25 on a Sunday, but they're ready to revitalize. And so they put out a call to the whole diocese. We don't have enough people to do this. Could you come? And so our people, some of our people got together and went out to help, building repairing the playground, trimming shrubs, planting the garden at this church property, and helping it to become something useful and meaningful and beautiful in our diocese. Attend community organized events together. And this is where I think we start a little bit of what we were talking about with the evangelism. I really firmly believe that we are on the web, but I think this, more than anything else, is what has enabled us to become known in the community. We go to things. This is the Holiday and Lights Parade. It's a community-sponsored Christmas parade. We couldn't make a float this year, so we just took a group, but we went as a group. This is theater shows. We take groups of our people and we go together. There's every time there's a new theater show, they go to lunch after church and then they come to the theater. And these are actually all children from our congregation, one of whom is in the play at the theater. We love supporting the theater because it is committed to outreach. They sponsor a theater camp every summer for the homeless children in the Arlington area, and our church has been able to partner with them, providing some of the scholarships and funding for that. And it's really a wonderful mutual relationship there. And I'm not, okay. And that's some more of our people supporting one of our youth at a theater show. Participate in the community organized outreach together. Walt mentioned to you that this particular congregation was formed on the basis of we're going to look out. We're going to stop looking at ourselves and saying, oh my goodness, this has been so awful. And we're going to start looking out to the world around us. And I believe we were challenged by the presiding bishop to do that. Is that correct? When she came to our diocese. And this group of people took that to heart. And by the time I arrived, it was made very clear to me as the incoming priest of that congregation that this congregation gives 10% of the budget to outreach, period. End of story. And I was delighted to see that. And that's the beginning, okay? That's the beginning of their giving, because that comes straight out of the budget. Then throughout the year, you know, there's ERD, and there's UTO, and there's other things, and there's a hurricane, and there's... And one of the years that we looked at this, while 10% of the budget had gone, an additional 12% amount had been given, donated over and above that to outreach ministries in the next year.
Quick question, is that in addition to your diocesan?
Diocesan assessment has nothing to do with outreach, except in as much as the diocese does its own outreach.
Right.
The diocesan outreach is like 16% or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and so now we started working with Crow Elementary, and I will just tell you right now, if any of you are connected to a church, which I assume you are if you're here, I think that the partnership program with elementary schools is one of the greatest things that the Episcopal Church can do, because we are a church that's filled with older individuals that may not be able to pick up a hammer and go build a house, but we can sit with a child and hear them read. And not only that, we love reading. We love books. We're into education. Great for us. And the last thing that I think makes this a perfect thing for the Episcopal Church, is Episcopalians have a really hard time saying the word Jesus in public, which makes us a perfect fit for a public school setting. And, you know, if every church would partner with an elementary school, preferably one that's lower income or whatever, in your neighborhood, we would see our nation changed, because these children need to be loved, and they need to have somebody listen and just be there with them. And it has changed that school, and it has changed our hearts as we participated in that. But I don't have a picture of Crow. Here is our going out and helping at the Arlington Charities Mission, doing backpacks and food distribution there. This is our volunteer team at the Martin Luther King Run. Our folks went out to help pass out water and do all of that. This is the team that was running at that race from our church. These are some folks who really didn't want to be out in the heat that day, and so they decided, since they couldn't go to the race that day, because our diocese had challenged us all to get out on MLK Day and do something, they went to Mission Arlington, and were helping with filing and sorting and doing some other things there. This group motivated themselves. It's the Bible study group that meets on Thursday. And they said, well, we're going to go do this. And so they were out there doing that. Gifts for Life, the young people at the church had gotten together a couple of Christmases ago and pooled their money to buy, I think they bought a goat, and I don't know, they bought several things. And right now, the young people are engaged around a notion of how could we make a big gift for ERD. And I don't know if it's going to work, but they're inspired around actually pulling together their theater friends and putting on the performance of Godspell, and then using the proceeds from that to raise $8,000 to give to ERD to buy a well and to put in, to put in a self-sustaining garden for an entire village. Pretty exciting. Other church services in funky locations. That has been fun. And our experience has been that when we have taken church out, people come. When we're willing to go and meet them where they are open and they are welcome. This is an event for animals that need adopting from the shelter. A big event throughout Arlington and meeting at this park. And one of our parishioners is on this team, in fact, helping head it up because of her own love of animals. But we started talking about, it was near St. Francis Day. Could we get a booth for the church and do a blessing of the animals? Because we can't do one at the theater. There's no room. We can't take those animals onto the lot there. And she took it to the committee, and the committee said, oh, that would be great. And which surprised her greatly, and in fact, it was the Baptists that were most intrigued by it. So this is our booth, and that's a Methodist minister there that was with me. There were 3 Episcopalians and 1 Methodist priest. Well, they don't call them priests, but elders. Anyway, we were all there. We held 2 services, one at the beginning and one at the end, and we blessed animals in between. And the people who were willing to come and say the prayers with us and receive a blessing for their animals, and of course we threw in a blessing for their home while they were there, might as well. Distribution of ashes at UTA. I know that the big, ashes to go is a debate in the church. We didn't know about ashes to go when we started doing this, but we did take, because we have a presence on the UTA campus, we took a team of us up there in our long robes, so that it was really obvious, that was our advertisement, is like we're walking around in these funny robes. And we walked around this area, this lot that was open, while they're selling tacos and they're, doing the hip hop music and everything, and we're carrying these bowls of ashes, walking up to people and saying, would you like ashes for Ash Wednesday? And you can imagine a few people were like, no thank you, and walked on. We had 81 people say, yes please. 81 people who let us stand there, a complete stranger, and smudge their forehead with blackened ashes and pray for them for a Holy Lent. And my experience is that when we take our particularity our liturgical sense of life and self, and we walk into these spaces that people are hungry and they're waiting and they're willing. Pentecost in the park, we take our service out to the park and we all wear red and, and just have a great time there, and then we have a big potluck meal. And I bring up all of these things because these are ways that our church is being present in the world, and people see and then they, well, who are you and what are you doing? And then we get in conversations with folks and they want to know more. This is a rollout prayer labyrinth that one of the other churches owns. We do not own it, but they let us borrow it. And twice now we have taken it up to the college campus and unrolled it with permission from the university, and had like some meditative music playing and introduced people to this method of prayer walk. And some people say, well, do you have to be Christians to use this? And we're like, no, you can use it. Feel free. Just here's what we do with it, but you're welcome to walk. And people participating. There's a hungry world out there. Weddings, it is a little tricky unless we happen to have the perfect setting at the moment that you need to be wed. But there are local, beautiful, beautiful parks where we have done a wedding, and we've only had one, but it was done at a park. This is not actually the park, but that is one way. The other thing is some of the larger churches in the area have said we can use their space. Funerals also. Other churches have let us use their building for the funeral. But also, I was really pleased with the way the funeral home was willing to work with me, because we wanted to do the whole walk in the casket in and chanting, and that's not what they normally do, but they were wonderful about working with us to create that space and make it into what our tradition would need it to be. And now I've got a connection with that funeral home, and the woman has said, I'd be glad to come and talk to your church about, end-of-life issues or whatever. It's great. Talking about resources and using the resources that you have in your diocese. This is the home of a member of our diocese, and there's one more picture. There's gorgeous, beautiful garden, and this was opened up for our use for a one-day retreat during Lent. But those kind of opportunities are all over the place if we will be open to them and invite people to share. Meeting congregation members' homes, that's one of the big things that we do. We hold Bible studies in homes. This is an after caroling party that someone hosted with cocoa and cookies. This is at the home of one of our parishioners who lives at a senior center, who helped coordinate with us to come to the center and do a caroling event. So we went to their home and gave a gift of caroling, and then we went to the other home and had cocoa. Oh, and I liked that slide, I don't know, because that's just beautiful to me, right? The intergenerational event that is there being displayed. Those are all our parishioners. They all came out to sing for that caroling event. Youth events, having youth events partnering with other churches so you have more youth, and meeting in various people's homes. There's the game night for the youth. The other beautiful blessing of having things in homes is you get moments like this, where you've got a teenager and a toddler and that cat, and they're all interfacing, and that was an event where we met to learn about Advent and how we can practice Advent in our homes. A wonderful, wonderful opportunity. There's a group of families meeting for a family event. So what? Does any of this have anything to do with you or your church? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But 2 weeks ago, tornadoes struck our neighborhood, and Arlington and everyone went under cover and under shelter. And this tree that you see standing on its head is at St. Barnabas Methodist Church. It was the only church that was damaged in the storm, and they cannot use their buildings right now. I don't know if they will be able to, I don't know what will have to happen. But that happened Tuesday before Easter. On Thursday, I went up to their church to walk around and see what can we do? How can the community help? And this is the sign that was posted in front of their building. The building may be down, but the church is still standing. And I thought how strongly that speaks to what we're talking about. And on Saturday, they organized an event where and it was organized by the youth department of their church, where they called everyone in the church to come together, wear your work clothes, get on your stuff, and meet at the church parking lot. We're going into the neighborhood to help the families whose homes were hit. And when I heard that that's what they were doing, and my parishioners know that I do this all the time, so when I heard that that's what they were doing, I thought, that's what our church did, was when the storm hit, we turned our eyes outward. And because of it, we saw life and we saw growth going on. That is a nebula in our solar system. It's called the Phoenix Nebula. And I was amazed at just how beautiful it is and how much it looks like the Phoenix drawing I showed you in the beginning. That is an actual creation out there looking over us. And the other thing, some of you were asking about the growth. When I came, we were running about 51 on Sundays. At this point, our average Sunday attendance is about 72. Our numbers have grown to where we have about 130 people on our books. And some of the membership are coming from those 7 churches in our area. Some of them are the new people who move in looking for an Episcopal church. And some of them are people's friends that they're starting to bring to church because they're saying, no, you can't believe what I get to do. And this is a place of joy, and it's not full of pain and conflict. And that's where we're at right now.
There were some similarities between San Joaquin and Fort Worth, except we led them by quite a bit. We actually started our first meeting with Michael Glass with 2 clergy who went to talk to him in 2003 because we saw the writing on the wall that the diocese was moving in a path, and the bishop had done. And at the convention in 2007, when they made the vote to leave, just to give you a sense, I was the only clergy person in the convention who had been active in the diocese and not since retired before Schofield became bishop. So I had been there for 20 years at that time, but nobody else voting, except for some of the retired clergy, had been there. So that makes a sense. There was a huge changeover in clergy, and so the diocese had been moved towards us. Some similarities, although our ASA prior to the split was about a little under 4,000, and our ASA in the diocese is about 1,000. So it's about 1/4 of the diocese stayed. We deposed 63 clergy in the diocese out of a total of only like 115 clergy. And a lot of those clergy were retired and out of the diocese and elderly. So there were very few clergy. So of the 50, it was almost identical, 53 congregations in the Diocese of San Joaquin, 8 parishes stayed, or in missions, some missions, and we ended up with 11 congregations that were partials, and then 2 more parishes joined. One mission where the lay people rebelled, and it was a very small place, but they got 22 out of 24 votes that they want to stay in the Episcopal Church, and they locked the clergy out. And that was sort of a funny story because I was actually on my motorcycle driving to a place, and I got this phone call, which you don't answer when you're on a motorcycle. And so I stopped, when I did stop, pull over, and this person was telling me what was going on, and I said, "What are you willing to do?" And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, would you?" And I said, "I can't tell you what to do because I'm not in the business of fomenting rebellion, but you could change the locks." He said, "Oh, I can do that. My husband's a locksmith." They went and changed the locks in the church and locked out the clergy person. So that was one that came back. And then the other one was a congregation in a larger church that had chosen not to go with the ACNA group, but to go with ACIA or AMI, whatever they are. And they looked at the legal situation, decided they would not win, just spend a lot of money, and they voluntarily came back and turned the church over. That created a problem because then they formed a bigger church that moved to a non-building, right? But because the diocesan headquarters is there now and some other things, it's working. So essentially right now, I wanted to talk about where we are right now as a diocese, because I come from the Canon of the Ordinaries position, and I was in a parish before this split occurred. My parish was growing and doing fine, and some others obviously weren't. But I'm the one who had been there longest, so I knew where the bodies were buried. That's why I became canon of the ordinary. So at the current time, we have 11 congregations that are not in buildings, and we have 10 that are. And I sort of rated them in 3 categories. One is what I consider to be viable. Now, viable does not necessarily mean vibrant, but viable. And of those 11 congregations that are not in buildings, I have 3 viable, 5 sort of okay, and 3 that are marginal. And this is non-attribution. The current canon of the ordinary is not here, so I can say things, but I'll say it even when she's here. Okay, and then in the building, ones in buildings, 3 viable, 5 okay, and 2 marginal. I think this applies to all dioceses. Okay? Now understand, ASA of the entire diocese is only 1,000. So that means out of 21 places, some of these congregations have 4 people meeting, 5 people. Many of the smaller congregations, of the marginal ones, have a group of maybe 10 or 15. I drove round trip 460 miles on Easter to do Easter service for 18. Okay, so we're talking relatively small. And by the way, that was not the furthest place I could have driven in the diocese. I could have gone to Ridgecrest, would have been about 600 miles. Okay. So, what's the definition? Why is one viable, one okay, and one marginal? Here are the 3 critical things we've discovered. And there's a lot more I could tell you, but I won't. Okay, 1, a viable congregation sort of has a critical mass and/or it's growing. So some of our viable congregations I put in that category, they may only have 25 members on Sunday, but they have been continually growing and are showing signs of growth. So things are happening. There is strong lay leadership in these congregations. The clergy person is not the prime person in the congregation. Or the clergy person is a person of great vision and is fostering and mentoring good lay leadership. Okay? And that was one of the biggest changes that occurred in San Joaquin from the time of the split till now, is that we have fostered in the diocese lay leadership, whereas prior was clericalism. I think the same thing happened at Fort Worth. It was all about the clergy, and it's all about them. And now we're saying, no, it's all about the people. And so that's a shift. It's a major shift. Those viable congregations are mission magnets. They are in fact looking. It's like static cling. They are looking for ways to communicate with their communities in outreach. And the same thing happens here. And there's a spirituality that's developing in those congregations that's focused around that. And the hope is present in those congregations. So when I go over the mountains to Ridgecrest, that's a relatively small group, they lost their buildings, they even changed their name. They were so upset with the people at St. Michael's, they said, we're going to call ourselves All Souls because we take all souls. Okay? And that's it's a group that meets. It's about 30 to 40, but they don't have a building. They meet in an old historical USO building out on the old China Lake. That's in the desert. And yet it's a great community. Okay, those people who are sort of in the okay but not completely there, there's a struggle usually in getting enough money and enough resources to do what needs to be done. And they usually can't support a full-time clergy person. Okay, so we have a lot of retired clergy, some part-time clergy that are serving. People serving more than one place. One person serves 4 places over a 2-county area. There is slow or no growth. And in some cases, they're burdened by buildings. Probably one was, I think, one of our largest congregations, I'm not sure they still are, have over a $3 million debt. They built, right at the wrong time, they built a church, they didn't build anything else. So they're struggling, and even though they're one of the larger congregations. And some just have little tiny funky buildings, and they're still struggling with those little buildings. the lay leadership is not as imaginative. And or the lay leadership is short. I mean, clergy leadership is short. And short in a sense of there's not enough, or it's short-sighted, or maybe they're just short. Okay? And there's some mission-mindedness in these places. We have a few of the places that find stuff, but they feel constrained largely because of their sizes. Well, there's only a few of us. We can't do anything. And that's, of course, you're going to die. And I would say that the emphasis is on maintenance and it's not on growth, it's not on mission. Those marginal ones, there's no vision. They've been extremely resistant to change. One example of this was I went to a place which I'd actually served as a vicar for a number of years, or a rector actually, and they had lost their building before the split occurred. And yet they had managed to rent it back on Sunday morning. So here they're still in their church that's not theirs. And it's a crappy building. It's over 100 years old and there's not been much maintenance done in the last 50. The Lutheran church is in the same thing in town, the ELCA church. They were talking about the same issues. We talked, as from the diocese of the Lutheran church, I come back to the Episcopal congregation and say, look guys, what an opportunity. They're Trinity Lutheran. You're Trinity Episcopal. How about becoming Trinity Episcopal Lutheran? No. I want to be buried out of this church. So that's a pretty good option. There is it's marginal mission. There's almost no sense of mission, or very little. It's hard to, and if you do have a mission, it's a encouraging mission. Not a whole lot of the people are involved in it. Okay, so that's a challenge. And in many cases, they're still mourning the loss of their building. They're still saying, well, if only we could go back, things would be okay. And in this case of Trinity, it's like, so what's going to be okay about getting this building back? There's no parking. There's not much of anything. It's a cute building for 1893. Okay? And of course, there's small numbers discouraged, and the gatekeepers are keeping the gate locked. Okay, you all know about gatekeepers. This is a major problem. In some of these smaller congregations that are very marginal, you have a few people who are still, still holding the reins and still got the gate closed. Okay, I had and I don't know whether this was, I don't know my time going. How far am I?
We're at 12:28.
Okay. I can finish up here within a couple of minutes over. Probably anticipation of coming here, I had this dream. And I'm not a big visionary, and I'm not going to go into this. That would be crazy like the other guys. But I had this dream, and in the dream I was in a parish, and they had this great first part of the service. I mean, the kids were involved and stuff, and the music was good. And I thought, God, this is a great church. I can't wait till announcements so I can tell them what a great job they're doing. And then it came time for the gospel, and I wanted to read the gospel, and I started to read the gospel, and somebody said, that's the wrong one. Look over there for it. So I went through it, and I couldn't find it in the book. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. And that's a dream, you know how dreams are. And then about that point, the rector said, because I was like the canon of the ordinary business, he said, oh, that's okay. We'll just leave the gospel out today. and of course, in the dream, I remember going, sitting down and saying, this is ridiculous. I'm getting my investments and leaving, which, of course, I've never done in reality. But I woke up with this dream, and I said, what does it mean? For me, it means if you don't have the gospel, no matter how well you do everything else, you're nothing. Okay, it's not worthwhile keeping. So, here's something that came out of another document, but the church is an embassy of the spiritual vision of Christ, and that is the kingdom of God. And our job as an embassy of the spiritual realm is not to stamp visas, it's to give people passports. Okay? And we are to gather the lost, the broken, and the alienated, and to love them into their true selves, which is in fact being the children of God, the people of the kingdom. There was a time in my life, I'm a retired Air Force chaplain, when I was responsible for going around and doing the goals and objectives for chapels. And the biggest challenge was getting people to agree on what the true mission of the chapel was. You would think that'd be not hard, right? Now, the Air Force had to go through this a little bit later, but the Air Force mission is to fly and fight. Keep it simple. So what's the chapels? It's to support those people and spiritually in their lives. Well, my feeling is if we as a church, and I can go back to these congregations that are vital in the Diocese of San Joaquin, and whether they have a building or not, if they have a clear vision of what they're doing, which is to be Christ's kingdom present, then they're the ones that are going to succeed. And they're the ones that are succeeding. Has nothing to do with the building. It has to do with the vision. And so this is what I think has the huge shift has to occur, and which has occurred by definition in the San Joaquin, in Diocese of San Joaquin. And that is that the building is a tool for the mission of the church. The building can't be the goal. When I was at Trinity Madera, within the first month, if you're a rector, you always change everything to start in the first month, because then people will be pissed at you, but you're still on your honeymoon and they can't divorce you yet. I changed where the altar was. I changed the altar rail. I tried to make it more better liturgical space. About 6 months later, at a funeral, one of the members came out and she berated me, and how could I have the audacity to change the church around? And so I very gently tried to explain to her about liturgical presence and why we did this and whatever. She said, I'm not talking about the altar, she said. I'm talking about the couch that I donated for the narthex, and you moved it. That is what the problem of the church is. It's not about where the candlesticks are, and it's not about where the altar is. It's about where the heart is. And, I'm going to say over here, the people are the church. But the church only exists in the heart of the people, and if the people don't have it, we're in trouble. So, it's enough. So thank you.